Hi there. How many in your party? Right this way. We'll put you at the chef's table. Enjoy.
Hey.
Welcome.
How's it going?
It's been too long, let me tell you.
Welcome to A Minor Diner. Not a minor diner, A Minor Diner, where we take a recent music release, give it a theme, pair it with two other works of art to create a three-course meal. We've got an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert to make our meal du mois, our meal of the month. I'm your treble chef, Jesse, and beside me is your bass chef, Zach.
Really, really excited to have you today. We have just a killer meal to serve you.
Oh, I just can't even believe you're in here, to be honest, because like, how was the parking? Be honest with us. How was the parking?
Already bringing up the parking.
It's such a big deal, especially this time of year. Everyone just gets spit out on the front there, and we have such a beautiful building and nothing to show for it. Nowhere for anyone to stop.
There's no reason to be worried about it. Parking is fine. There's trains.
Wait a minute. There's the lot. We could do the lot next door.
I think the lot's owned by the city, Jesse.
The city.
The city
owns the
it.
lot? Well,
yeah.
What does that have anything to do with what I was saying? You don't think this is a good idea? We put in a bid.
I'm not worried
figure
about
it out
it. It's
who
fine.
owns it.
It's fine.
You know what? I'm just gonna handle this then. I will be the parking czar. I will handle the parking.
All right. Well, anyways, so for this month's Meal du Mois, we have the look of love, the aesthetics of attraction. So love and attraction, they've been depicted in all forms of art, every different medium since the beginning of time.
You've got the Mona Lisa, you've got Pretty Woman, you have, Venus emerging from the sea, the famous painting. There are different ways of depicting love at first sight, long-term love, initial attraction in all different ways.
Don't forget Sexy Bitch by Akon as well.
I try not to. It's actually my morning alarm clock, as you know.
Yeah.
But there are many different aspects to art that you can measure with aesthetics, and there is no probably more fertile ground of exploring art than love and attraction. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the years, there have been different methods and techniques and things like that to display that weird, warm, gooey feeling we feel inside when we happen to see that person or thing that we're attracted to.
Yep. Absolutely. So we knew we just had to serve you this kind of meal after we got brand new shipment of some fresh, hand-kneaded dough straight out of the valleys of Southern California. It's a sophisti-pop record. It's Rye's third full-length Home. So Rye, they were started by Mike Milosh of Toronto, Canada, and Robin Hannibal of Denmark back in 2013. The band, now a solo project, basically, for all intents and purposes, specialize in sexy, moody R&B made to enjoy with that special someone. But is that special someone really someone, or is it just an ideal? We've paired Home with a 1950 magazine cover and a 1593 pastoral poem. I hope you're hungry, because coming to the table right now is our appetizer. This month for you, we have the January 1950 cover of Vogue magazine, photographed by Erwin Blumenfeld, sometimes known as the doe eye photo. All right, so before we go into the doe eye, I wanted to, just because I don't think he's really a household name, kind of talk about Erwin Blumenfeld a little bit. Were you familiar with him before I picked?
No, he is not quite. They don't put him on cereal boxes.
No, not yet, not yet. But maybe after this meal they will.
Yes, he'll be on the Wheaties, yeah.
So Blumenfeld, born in Berlin, Germany, January 1897. He moved to Amsterdam when he was a 21-year-old young man and became friends with some artists in the burgeoning Dada scene. Yeah. Dada scene kind of focused on being absurd, being anti-capitalist, this and that, kind of anarchist style of art making. He was making collages, making art collages, but what he always really wanted to do was photography. moved to Paris in 1936, started getting some freelance work with French Vogue. But as happens, history came in and kind of screwed up some plans. History intervened.
If you've ever heard anything about the 30s or 40s,
yeah,
it kind of changed some things.
There are some events that kind of overshadowed everything else. So World War II, he and his family were all placed in an internment camp because of their Jewish origins. But after about a year in the internment camp, he managed with his family to emigrate to America. And this is actually kind of an interesting reading about his story kind of reminded me that the American dream did once exist.
Yeah, there's sort of that upward mobility that we claim that we have. And I mean, truth be told, I think that we are a bit too hard on ourselves now for like not allowing that. At the same time, it's incredibly impossible compared to what it was in the post-war boom. But yeah, like he literally came from nothing across the sea, landed in America, and managed to make a serious name for himself.
Really quickly, too. So he moves to New York in 1941. Then, by 1943, he has already acquired his own studio. By the end of the decade, he is one of America's most successful and highly paid photographers. So between 1944 and 1955, he photographed nearly 50 covers for Vogue alongside Harper's Bazaar, a lot of other photography and fashion magazines. Lots of covers, lots of really good photographs. I could have chosen many of them, but I went with his famous Doe Eye cover, which again was the January 1950 cover of Vogue. And it's kind of an interesting little photograph.
It is. It's got an interesting, like, I think with Blumenfeld in general, there's a lot of, I would like you, the connoisseur, the diner here, to not take too many things for granted. Like, for example, how you just said 1941 to 1950 is his meteoric rise. The country is kind of preoccupied with a bunch of other things. Like, it's not like war today. The whole country has like a singular focus. And so for an immigrant, especially a Jewish immigrant, maybe we were slightly warmer to that in the 40s, but we certainly weren't opening doors for European immigrants, especially not Jewish ones. And for him to be landing magazine covers is not really any less competitive than it is today.
Yeah.
And so, especially when you get to Doe Eye in 1950, this is something that I think we're guilty of, and it's kind of a general point that I will probably be making for this entire meal about the perils of aesthetics and like the actual downsides. That aesthetics is like how you measure how anything affects your five senses, essentially, your perception and things like that. And normally aesthetics is like the resonance of what is aesthetically pleasing is measured by how much reflection it causes in you. So like what resonates with you. But I would argue that modern art, and not to sound like an old guy screaming at kids on the lawn, which I do because there's no parking here and we need that space. But
move on.
Yes, I would argue that aesthetics, as it pertains to how it is incorporated into our lives right now, it just comes to mean like pleasing sound, pleasing sight, pleasing taste, pleasing touch, whatever. And it's not so much like, for example, on this, if we were to look at Doe Eye today, I could do Doe Eye in probably like 45 seconds on like.
So let's just for audiences that are not familiar, the photo still honestly pretty striking today. So the Vogue cover, the word Vogue, big up top, and then the entire background is white, like very, very almost a clinical white, and the only color we've got the arched eyebrow. We've got a kind of green shaded eye, very red lips, and just a beauty mark right next to the lips. And that's it. So it's full white, and it's just those pieces of the model, whose name was Jean Patchett, a popular model of the time. Just those features of her face, which is, it's kind of strikingly avant-garde. It's interesting. There's a website that features, you can look at every Vogue cover throughout the years from like the 1890s, I believe Vogue started, all the way to today. And the thing that strikes you about most of them is they are really dull. So they're very very of their time.
Yeah.
Okay. So looking at the other like 1940s, 1950s Vogue covers, it's basically just like 3/4 shots of women in clothing fashions of the day.
Right.
All right. So then you look at this and it's like, dang, this is different.
Yeah. And I would say, almost exactly that, because I have a friend in fashion, and I don't want to butcher her quote here, but like actually in fashion, like in Europe for a good part of the year and then back over here. And she has a general philosophy that is, if I butcher this quote, I apologize, but fashion is making people feel lesser for what they lack, whereas style is making them feel better about what they do have. And so when you look at this Vogue cover with Doe Eye, it's basically a caricature in a way that, like, as if an illustrator or an artist were to depict a person. It's so reduced to literally, I mean, you can call it sex appeal, but it's literally what the human eye kind of tends to gravitate towards when you're talking to someone. It just straight to their eye, one of their eyes, and then their mouth or lips or whatever. And there's something very, because reading about Blumenfeld, his other work, like his less commercial work, and not commercial in a derogatory sense, but the work that he was doing for himself, that his two main areas of interest were death and women.
Yeah.
And I was a bit struck by that, because like how you just described how simplistic and boring most of the Vogue covers were. I think that's an interesting way to describe fashion itself. It's like, it's this weird, you're not seeing 60-year-old women on the cover of anything fashion related. And when you have something like this, she's ageless and she's featureless. Because if you ever talk to anyone, man or woman, any age, anything, nobody likes their nose. Nobody likes their forehead. Nobody likes their chin or their jawbones or anything like that. And Blumenfeld has sort of reduced that in a way that I find pretty profound, because it's, for a guy that escaped the Holocaust, like, otherwise it would be morbid. Like, he's taking away the humanity from this woman of, like, she doesn't have a nose, she doesn't have cheeks, she doesn't have anything. But in this case, there's a very weird confidence to it and simplicity with that negative space that, even like I was saying today, you could be very reductionist and reduce this down to like, it's an eye and a mouth, and anyone could do that, like the modern art opinion. But there's something very, like, anyone could make a flower too, but that doesn't make it less, it's beautiful because of its simplicity.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, it's striking, a lot of the reasons it's striking is because of the time period. Like, if you saw this, because looking at these Blumenfeld designs from the late 40s, early 50s, they honestly look like they could be straight out of like a Nicholas Winding Refn film. Like, it is pure, how would you put it? Like, he was one of the first, if not the first, to bring art into the fashion world. And one of the ways that he did this, he was, instead of just pointing and shooting, he would do that, but spend a lot of time in the dark room and actually screwing with the photo afterwards. So there was a quote from William Ewing, an art curator of the time, said, "Blumenfeld didn't respect rules. He was very proud of saying that if the instruction on the new film said never to heat it above room temperature, he would boil it. if it said never let it go below room temperature, he'd throw it in the freezer. And then you'd get these strange effects on the surface. And you can see that in a lot of his photography, that there's almost these strange kind of artifacts that is making this photograph that should be, because the prevailing thought of the time, and I still think the prevailing thought of many fashion photographers is, it's like, well, this is beauty right here. You are a beautiful woman or a beautiful man or whatever, and shooting you just straight on, that's going to be the most obvious aesthetic of attraction per se, the most obvious look of love. But then I think it makes it so much more interesting if you take that, you strip away all of the bullshit, and you're just left with this doe eye cover, or for example, the Red Cross cover, which was during World War II, 1944, I want to say. It's a really, really interesting cover where the model is behind a kind of opaque Red Cross. So you can barely see what she's wearing. You can't see what her face looks like at all. And the entire, the cover of Vogue for that month was advertising for blood drives, and the Red Cross and everything. So I don't know. It was just interesting throughout looking at his pieces.
Well, and because you bring up Dada, and it's just an interesting thought that I'm no great fan or detractor of postmodernism, but it's Dada is a precursor of let's just take form and function and kind of flip it, like you said. If don't heat it up, I'm going to boil it. And I think that's why you get something like this, where there's humanity in the simplicity, because I would argue, from an extremely unintelligent, ineloquent way of phrasing this, that World War II basically kind of destroyed the image of the self being a beautiful thing or whatever. Like you just said, that Vogue cover is kind of somewhat, it's, even though it's for a good cause, it's somewhat dehumanizing, because you don't quite get the face and you don't get this and that. And you look at this cover, like Doe Eye, and things of the time, playing with aesthetics and general commerce is figuring out how to advertise to people visually. And then you fast forward to today, if you're aware of Terry Richardson, whatever, he's the allegedly not up to par photographer, but his works, he would photograph models basically just on white backgrounds with flash on. So it's almost like not quite against an alley wall, but just a white wall with normal flash, with 2000s era cameras or whatever. And the point is we over glamorize and we overdo fashion photography to look striking, and he wanted it to look real. But it's in that way that separates, in my opinion, Dada from postmodernism, of so what exactly is the point? What is the statement of saying we have $1 million budget, but we're going to take a supermodel and just Polaroid her against the white wall? It's what is the actual statement here? What's the defiant artistic? Whereas this is, he couldn't just do this. That's sort of what I was saying earlier. You could do this in 45 seconds today. Just isolate a photo's eye and then the lips and then make it white. But he had to take these photos, treat the photos in the darkroom, and then collage them together. And that's not an accident. The way that the eye placement from the lip placement, the angle has to be perfect, and the placement proximity has to be perfect. And that shows, you can see fingerprints on his work, whereas I would argue modern day aesthetics is a bit too sterile.
Yeah. But I mean, going back to the time of Blumenfeld, if you were to kind of look 80 years after the fact, after looking at some Blumenfeld photos, I mean, he was the first one to do this, in a sense, to strip away everything in favor of kind of a very chic, very I guess you could say fake, kind of
Like uncanny valley sort of thing.
uncanny valley, sort of. I just think it more so than other photographs of the time. It has this kind of like artful avant-garde elegance that I think is very prominent today. It wasn't back then, but now you could almost view it as like a negative thing, right? So if you're looking at kind of the like objectifying of women's bodies as like, so in fashion, for example, just taking a part of the woman's body and have it like disembodying it from the rest of the body,
Dissecting it in that
dissecting
way.
it in that way, or for example, photoshopping the hell out of images to look a certain way.
Yeah.
Like this was one of the first examples of that.
Yes. And in a way that's like, it's almost like he goes so far on the spectrum, because there is no spectrum. Like you say, he's essentially pioneering, because he is Dada, he is European, he is all of these things. But Blumenfeld is kind of a singular vision in terms of like Picasso and things like that. He is his own form. And if you were to write this on paper, that it's a disembodied eye and her lips on the most surgical, like white background or whatever, it's pretty morbid for like, oh, of course he came from Holocaust Europe. Like, it's insane. But there's like a complete spark with like the way the light reflects off of her lips, and then especially in her eye, because her eye isn't the same color as the eyeshadow that she's wearing there. But like, if you were to do it today, like you said, it's less of a, he's simplifying the, whatever you want to call it, feminine mystique, the general, the aura of this model. And I'm sure she was probably delighted with this depiction of her.
Made her more famous than she was.
And not in a weird way of
Yeah.
like, no one met her and said like, oh, she's got an ugly nose, or oh, this or that. They're
Yeah.
like, no, I got the spirit of the model, rather than like you're saying today. It's like, oh yeah, her hips are really great in that photo, but like she's actually, whatever, the arms are weird or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's very superficial. And that's a weird sort of thing to play with, that the aesthetics of attraction on a scientific level or on whatever level would be superficial by nature, but it isn't actually. And I think that Blumenfeld sort of epitomizes this, because I looked at some of his other work, and he's got this, it's very simple to be pessimistic and jaded, especially after World War II, that life sucks and life is evil and people are evil and this and that. But he embraces women without dehumanizing them.
Yeah.
And he embraces death without dehumanizing death. Because I read some quote recently, I can't remember, I think it's probably a Buddhist speaker or something, that like death is the most human thing, and you should celebrate death, because if we didn't have death, we wouldn't be human. And like looking at this, it's it's not even a matter, does it hold up or not, or how does it affect today? It's like, well, it'll never age.
Yeah.
In the same way the Mona Lisa won't ever age.
Yeah.
Because it's such a singular depiction, such a unique depiction, that you're getting that 1 + 1 = 3 feeling of yeah. I like a young woman with pretty eyes and pretty lips or whatever, but there's personality in there.
Yeah.
Beyond, I don't mean to be so disparaging to the entire Instagram community, but there are a series of poses that are very easy, quick. You're going to get 10,000 likes if you give that eyebrow arch or this sort of stance or whatever. And she has that in a, I can't quite remember the actress's name. She's in Sullivan's Travels, like a 1940s film star that is a bit of a starlet that's sultry and has that sort of femme fatale energy. She has that here, and not in a way that comes across as inauthentic. And I think that's absolutely insane for an image that is objectively 90% white space. To see another person staring back at you is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So overall, I feel the reason I picked this and the reason I think it's such a striking photo is even though this is such an old photo, it's still out of its time. And also looking at it, you just get the idea that something about aesthetics is always constructed, right? So our idea of beauty, our idea of aesthetics is always constructed. And there are every piece of art, every media helps to construct that singular idea in your mind that you think is yours, but it's not fully yours, right? And I think what's so interesting about Blumenfeld's work, because it was so ahead of its time in terms of like post-production techniques and in terms of manipulating, like photo manipulation, it kind of sums that up, right? Because it's so out of time, because it's a 1950 version of this ideal, I think it kind of sums up that weird idea that the look of love, the aesthetics of attraction are at least partially constructed.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think that Blumenfeld, because the one thing I haven't said about him is actually looking him up is a bit tricky because he's such a prolific artist that you tend to get his work.
Yep.
But when you see a picture of him, he's like the sweetest looking man that I've ever seen in my life. Like he's got these big eyes, these big doe eyes, if you will, that are just, he looks not harmless, but like very wholesome.
Uh-huh.
And I think exactly what you're saying, that either he had the good sense to know when to stop, of it's probably not a good idea to make this a morbid image for Vogue's cover, or he was simply, what he was doing was so revolutionary at the time, because these techniques that we apply now, it is a construction, and I think that maybe sometimes we get too far into that construction and constructing the perfectly, the golden ratio, if you will, the perfect image.
Yeah.
And there's like, you squeeze all of the humanity out of it, all of the actual attraction and actual beauty.
Mm-hmm. And that, you could say that started with Blumenfeld, or you could not. A Minor Diner would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors. Are people on dating apps sending you back to the waiter? Are your Instagram posts tasting lukewarm or undercooked? Perhaps the problem is with you. Never post another photo without the revolutionary new technology found in our app. Transform your cold sauerkraut casserole selfie into amore, lobster, shrimp, and salmon art. Be like us here at A Minor Diner and use Whiteface for all your photo needs. Our state-of-the-art attraction algorithms take you and make you sexy, giving you the sense of worth you never had. Whiteface, making you better than you could ever be.
Today's episode is also brought to you by 1994's action thriller, Speed. 20th Century Fox brings you an edge-of-your-seat, pedal-to-the-metal, limited express, 33,000-pound romance between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, two icons of an era fated never to work together again. Speed is available now on VHS and Laserdisc exclusively at Hollywood Video locations. Speed. Get ready for rush hour. Now, you may have noticed here at A Minor Diner that we have seat belts near your cushions. Well, I would like you to please buckle up because we're going back to 8 AD.
Whoa!
Hold on to your butts. Ovid, the Roman, writes Metamorphoses, an epic poem in every sense of the word, both in terms of scope and scale. In Book 10, he tells the story of Venus, who is the goddess of love, falling for Adonis, the most beautiful man in the world.
Basically like the god version of Fabio.
Yes. Fabio meets whoever the love goddess would, Marilyn Monroe. We'll just use that. So Metamorphoses it is one of the most influential works in history. There is so much, it's books on books on books, but it is very inconsistent and very scattered and sort of is written by a Roman for Romans at that time. And so as a result, the idea of Venus and the idea of Adonis is very unclear and scattered, and there is no direct like canon until 1593. There's a plague. A young man known as William Shakespeare, not who we know him as today. He's done some plays in London and things like that, but he sits down to write his first published work, which is a poem, Venus and Adonis, 199 stanzas that paint a very consistent and more artistically resonant picture of what it would be like if the goddess, the embodiment of love, was pursuing the world's most beautiful man. As a start, I don't know if you have read much poetry recently via Instagram or via, certain...
Do you read poetry via Instagram?
Well, I will, yes, because there's a thing called Insta poetry. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Okay, good. I'm glad you're not aware of it, because it's, I don't mean to say, however anyone wants to choose to express themselves is great.
Yes.
But it is very, I don't mean to be disparaging, but Insta poetry is insanely bad. And I don't mean to say such a declarative statement as if it's objective fact, but it's things like, I'm like February, but he's like September, Sagittarius. And that's like just very, I'm going to write half of a sentence, break it for no reason, because I've seen Robert Frost break it, but mine is not going to necessarily have anything to do with anything.
So it's fan fiction via Instagram poetry.
Yes, but the problem is, and we'll get into aesthetics in a sense, because Instagram is an inherently aesthetic. The internet kind of is reliant on aesthetics. These people make bank. Like there are Insta poets that are New York Times bestsellers when they sell their books of, you remind me of what it's like to live in summer, even though it's winter kind of thing.
Ooh,
and it's like,
I got to get into this.
It's like 37,000 likes. Like, wait a minute here. What are we doing? So when you bring up a poem, most people think of like Robert Frost or Edgar Allan Poe or things like that. And back in Shakespeare's day, 199 stanzas is still viewed as like a insane thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
like a minor epic.
Yeah, to do that as a poem, because you can call many different things a poem, and you should. They don't necessarily have to rhyme or follow a consistent meter or things like that. Shakespeare, basically as the originator of so many different meters and forms, he does write it in ABABCC format. 199 stanzas of that, meter perfect, every syllable perfect, to a degree that he may have been in relative obscurity before that, but Venus and Adonis basically got all the way up to the Queen of England, and was his first published work ever, but even during his lifetime, it was his most popular by far, because you can't quite, you have to attend a play, and they don't necessarily perform those everywhere, and he's very subversive and quote-unquote dirty for the time. So Venus and Adonis was seen as this, like, almost like a Twitter thread, but like if the greatest writer that ever lived did a Twitter thread. Were you familiar with any of William Shakespeare's, like, written works, not to be
sonnets
performed?
and poems, and I was aware that they existed. I've read a few of his plays at this point, not familiar with the poetry side of things before this was brought to the diner.
Yes, and in a very large truck it was brought in.
Oh Lord,
I mean, 100, like, just picture 199 of anything.
Yeah.
And then it's 6 lines that are all, I can't remember how many syllables each. That takes a very, very long time.
If I was old Bill back in the late 1500s, I would be exhausted. That's got to take so long.
And it's, as you would come to expect, he does not have all, as you'd say today, bangers. They're not all bangers. They don't all slap, his plays and his written work. But he is pretty revolutionary when it comes to, like, foreshadowing and just allusions to things and poetic devices and inventing words.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you write a poem today, what I mean by saying A, B, A, B, C, C means those are the 8 lines or the 6 lines of the poem. And so your first and third lines rhyme, your second and fourth lines rhyme, and then your fifth and sixth lines rhyme. And this poem was so notable, and so he didn't invent it, but it was such a profound use of that form that it's called the Venus and Adonis structure or stanza. And that's kind of a rare thing, to write a poem so good that you get to claim an entire corner of poetry.
Right.
But when it comes to the actual aesthetic value and as it relates to attraction and love, Venus is the goddess of love, and she looks down on Earth and sees Adonis, who's the most beautiful man that ever lived, and just says, I must have him. And he is, it's not necessarily like Greek or Roman where he's a demigod, but he's, the most exemplary human being. So he's close to godliness, but not literally like her. And so there is a form of poetry, not necessarily structure, but called a pastoral poem. And pastoral means that you're retreating from the city or civilization and going out into nature. And that's an interesting thing as it pertains to our discussion of aesthetics, and especially the Blumenfeld conversation where it's a construction, whereas nature and like a beautiful mountain valley with a stream running through it is by some virtue, I guess, constructed by nature or whatever, but in chaos and for no reason, rather than what civilization would otherwise be. And so in the same way that you sort of take a sabbatical or you go on a pilgrimage out to nature today to go hike or something to clear your mind of the mess and the noise of the city, this was the same sort of feeling that I'm sure everyone was feeling at the time, because like I said, it's during a plague, which is not relatable at all.
No, I don't know what that's like.
It's something, if you take a couple minutes to yourself to think about, put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah. But also, so this is not only during a plague, but you don't have Netflix. You barely have a home. You sleep on the floor. You pour your shit in the street. Like, it's not a lovely time.
No, there's nothing to do but look out the window and wish that you had a better window to look out at, basically. Even the Queen probably felt that at the time. And so I'm sure to him, it's like I've written some things before in isolation or things like that as like a little challenge. And I'm sure to him that's all this was a challenge until a certain point where it's like, I guess I'd be dumb not to publish it because I already put in this work. But he just even reading through, I'll start with one of his first stanza here, just to sort of take you through. There is the actual aesthetics of a poem or whatever, and then there's what it conjures in your mind's eye. And so his very, very first stanza, and forgive me if my meter isn't completely proper, I don't feel like pronouncing this in Old English, whatever, so I'm going to use a very standard American accent. Even as the sun with purple-colored face had taken his last leave of the weeping morn, rose-cheeked Adonis hied him to the chase, hunting he loved, but loved. Let me start this again, because it's Shakespeare, and it's like, if you're not Patrick Stewart, it's yes, take two. You don't get takes in theater, but I'm from film, so whatever. Even as the sun with purple-colored face had taken his last leave of the weeping morn, rose-cheeked Adonis hied him to the chase. Hunting he loved, but love he laughed to scorn. Sick-thoughted Venus makes amain unto him, and like a bold-faced suitor begins to woo him. You wouldn't say begins because it throws off the meter, but even just hearing that, it's tricky to write a poem in general that just sort of evokes a non-narrative feeling in someone, like a Robert Frost, Two Roads Diverge in a Yellow Wood thing. But Shakespeare, for 199 stanzas, basically does what Netflix would be, of like, here's little mini scenes and mini episodes, and they're all going to rhyme. And there's going to be a degree of artistry in this because what I'm trying to argue with Venus and Adonis is that actual love and actual attraction and even actual aesthetics, in my opinion, my argument is that it can't be so obvious as one of the five senses, if that makes sense. So like there's the idea, the sun, purple colored face, weeping morn, rose cheeked Adonis, hunting, he's laughing, she's sick thoughted, bold faced suitor, and she wants to woo him. Like these are all very plot.
Yeah.
And the plot of something, like we might criticize a Marvel movie for having a dumb plot, and therefore the aesthetics of a Marvel movie is dumb. And I'm not going to defend Marvel movies, but what I'm going to say is like, in modern life, I would argue that we tie too much of aesthetics to plot, in the sense that even as the sun with purple colored face had taken his last leave of the weeping morn, that line alone, and then especially everything after that, is like you just read the entire poem without realizing it. The degree of like, I don't want to give away any spoilers here because I'd like you to finish chewing your food on your own, and I won't tell you what it's going to taste like at the end. But like the degree, if you've read Venus and Adonis and you read the first paragraph, it's like, okay, you just spoiled the entire story, even though you didn't at all. The actual plot is very simple to understand, but if you think about the sun with a purple colored face means, okay, the sun is rising. The sun is purple in the sky, and so therefore it's rising, which it's the beginning of the story. And Venus and Adonis takes place over the course of one day, so it's sunrise to sunset. And rose-cheeked Adonis is like, okay, he's rosy-cheeked in the way that we like young men or young women to be, shows that they're full of life. But then sick-thoughted Venus makes a main unto him, like a bold-faced suitor begins to woo him. Is like an inherent, from a screenwriting perspective, like, okay, Venus is, he might be innocent, he just wants to hunt, whereas she wants him, she's hunting him, so the hunter becomes the hunted. But the idea that the goddess of love has anybody that she has to woo is kind of an inherent hooking thing. And so through reading, and I will let my co-chef here speak, but through reading Venus and Adonis, I would hope that it begins to seep into you not the most bold and obvious flavors of what love and aesthetics are.
Continue that point. Give me another sentence about that.
I definitely can, because I will not spoil the whole thing.
Is it spoilers if we are spoiling a story that was written in 8 AD?
The statute of limitations, or whatever you want to call that, the spoiler warning, is technically 8 AD, so I'll give you that. But maybe we have like a 2 millennium. Well, I guess even then we're past 2 millennium, so
yeah.
Barely by a couple of years. To spoil it a bit, it's almost like a Lifetime movie plot, as we'd see it today, where Venus comes down, or not even, maybe like Spike TV or some like masculine, like weird sort of thing. It's like a mixture of those, because Venus is like pouring her heart out.
Venus is the one hunting in the sensual sense.
Yes.
And speaking of sensual, I mean, this is actually, for the time, a relatively erotic poem.
Yes. And I guess pastoral poems of the time tend to be somewhat erotic. And like you said, there's no Netflix, there's no everything else that comes on the internet. There is no nothing. You have you and your wife and maybe your kids or whatever, and you all live in one room. And so you gotta,
Oh yeah, you gotta leave some things up to the imagination.
Yes,
more.
you gotta paint a picture without actually painting it. In the same way Blumenfeld, you gotta give them the suggestions and then let them piece it together. But Venus is so cerebral and so emotional and so like pouring her heart out of like why she wants to be with him. But literally, like some surfer dude, Adonis is like, I just want to hunt. Just
give me the boar.
I have a horse and I love him, kind of, not in the way you love anything. I just think he's cool, and I just want to hunt. And she's, no, but stay and talk. I gotta hunt. Why? I feel like it. That's the whole thing. Is this? I just happen to be the most beautiful man in the world.
Yeah.
And so there's this superficial element of it that she doesn't know anything about Adonis, and Adonis is a bit empty-headed too. And so there's this, he's not writing a parody or satire of love, but there is this very serious, okay, this is actually in essence what attraction is and how magical it can be, literally, because she's a god, and how insanely stupid it can be.
Magical, yet easily confused, I guess you could say. So we do tend to equate attraction or lust with love, especially when we're young, right? And Adonis, throughout this poem, it comes off as a very immature kind of Roman version of the surfer dude that is like, bro, I just want to get the boar.
Yes.
Like, can you stop bugging me?
And barely for any reason. I mean, he is mortal, so he does have to eat, but he's just like, I fill my day with something I enjoy. And it's fulfilling to go chase a pig in the woods, basically.
Yeah.
Which is another euphemism for love, I guess. But it's because then it's not until he's got a horse, and then his horse meets another horse. And I think his horse is a male horse. It doesn't really matter the genders, but it meets one of the opposite sex. And then he's like looking at this and he doesn't get it. Like, this horse likes this horse. We were about to go boar hunting. What's up with this? And then that kind of, it sinks in like, oh, that's probably what the lady thinks of me or whatever. This god lady, whatever. And the horses go run off. And so he's like, well, shoot, I guess I got to talk to you.
Because I got nothing else to do now.
Yeah, exactly. And so they talk, and she is saying, planning out the rest of their lives together. And he's like, very blatantly, I guess, eloquent in how blatant it is. He's like, you don't even know me. Like, I might be pretty. I might be the prettiest thing that ever lived, but I have no idea who you are. And you have even less of an idea of who I am. And she is so heartbroken by some of the things he says that she like faints, and that she just can't take, because she's love. So she's depicted as human being, but if she is rejected, it's like a rejection of her entire essence.
Of herself.
Yeah. And so he's like, oh no, well, this is the opposite of what I meant to do. I want to hunt the pig, not kill the girl or whatever. Yeah. So he does like a Prince Charming Snow White, like does kiss her or whatever. And it does wake her up. It's not some sort of nefarious thing that she was planning. And she tries to go for more. And he says, no, I got to go hunt the pig.
Yep.
That's what we're doing here. And she conveys to him, in essence, it's not like verbatim in the story, but like, I just saw visions of you dying, that the pigs were going to kill you or whatever. And he's...
Because wild boars, if you are not aware, are mean creatures. Very, very violent.
Yes, they're
very dangerous.
Big boys, and they have a temper, and they're
big boys.
Yes,
they're big
it
boys,
says that
and they
in the poem. It actually, yes,
that's one of the stanzas.
Yeah,
they big boys, and they'll sell you apart.
He came up with a lot of words, and that was one of it. It's big boys. So the Shakespeare state makes a couple of sense every time anyone says that, but he just wants to go hunt, and he's not going to have the horse anymore, or things like that. But she has this vision that, no, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And he's saying, anything that you are telling me is not rooted in reality, because you just love me for whatever reason. And so he goes off, and she is sort of, whatever you want to call it, monologuing or opining about like, well, how am I going to resolve from this situation? Because I can't live without him. I can't live with the goddess of love must have the most beautiful man. And then she goes to find him again, and he's dead. He just has died. The pigs have killed him. So the most
big
beautiful
boys got the best of him.
The big boys got our Fabio surfer boy. And he is like not a Shakespearean death where it's like this like final moment and the sun is cresting the hill or whatever. He's dead. Like the body's cold. He's white. And his blood has been there for so long that it's now purple. So you go zooming back, if you're an astute reader in 1593, even as the sun with purple-colored face had taken his last leave of the weeping morn, he's a white body, the sun of whatever, purple-colored face because he's dead, had taken his last leave. He died of the weeping morn. She's sorrowful that he died. And it's like all there. Rose-cheeked Adonis hied him to the chase. Hunting he loved, but love he loved to scorn. It's like the entire summary of the entire plot. And so the ending is that she, as love, says that, okay, well, from now on, love is always going to be afflicted by jealousy and fear and paranoia and things like that.
Because she is love. She is the essence of love. And now that she has been bastardized, in a sense, it will be now forever.
Yes. And it's because as the goddess of love and as the most beautiful man that ever lived, this is love, surely. Like, I love with all my heart, and he's the most picturesque person, and I can idealize that and depict that in my head. And so you have this very interesting relationship. Shakespeare puts this out, and I can imagine it's not Victorian England, but it's even, I guess, technically less exposed to sensuality and things like that it is a very erotic, provocative poem.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I guess, ironically, probably so popular because it's taken as this very affair of the gods and the giant mood swings and things that can come with love and come with attraction. And my argument at this point in time, at this table here in the restaurant, is that that's a very, like you're saying, when we're young, we do that well, that girl's perfect. I remember there was a girl growing up that was just like, and we're going to get married. I've never talked to you before in my life, but we are definitely the two that are going to get married. And I think it's not an indictment on Eastern culture, Western culture, modern life, any sort of life. I think there is a tendency, even among the least romantic among us, that love still has like an aesthetic that must exist with it. And it's a very dangerous thing that I would argue that you can't. Love itself is a bit, this is going to be the most eloquent comparison you've ever heard in your life, that love is a bit like the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones movie, where if you try to look at it and if you try to actually address it in a tangible touch, taste, sight, smell, or sound way, that you're like a Nazi getting
it will melt your literal face off. Yes,
and I think you'll ruin it. And I think that is young love. And then I think that's also, I guess it's a kind of a weird time to be growing up, for anyone to be growing up. And what I mean by that is since he was born, like a lot has happened in the last 200 years. And I think we don't have a depiction or understanding of love culturally, and by culturally, that would inform our aesthetics. We don't have a depiction of love that isn't either our parents, because that's who we're growing up and seeing in whatever relationship, or literally media.
Yeah.
And it's a tricky, like Shakespeare, you can have your opinion, but he's probably top 5 best English writers of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
Top 200
at least. He's getting there. We'll see how the rest of his plays go.
Yeah.
But it's, if he is depicting things as like, okay, look, this is not real. Adonis doesn't actually exist because he's a faultless man. Appearance-wise would still be subjective entirely, almost. And then a goddess of love doesn't exist. So here is just the most, I'm going to take this to its logical conclusion. Let's exaggerate this as much as possible. And if you look at, for example, like I would argue my general point being that, like, imagine a romantic movie or a romantic novel or things like that. I would argue they're all almost objectively trash. Like, and I think anyone would view that as a, quote, guilty pleasure, I guess, is what you could call it. I don't
love the term, but yeah.
Yes, neither do I. And that's, I think it's this weird, I'm not experienced, I want to feel love or what it's like or imagine myself. My grandma used to read romance novels when I was growing up, and I thought, that's fine for an 80-year-old woman who is widowed. Like, that makes sense for her. But other people, like as an example, Gone with the Wind is not my favorite movie or book ever made, but it's like, okay, that's about the South and culture and a bunch of other things in addition to being a love story, right? Then you look at your average like K-drama or whatever, or soap opera or whatever. There's not like a subplot to those. It's like the plot.
No, the plot is the love.
Yeah, exactly.
But so the interesting thing is, so what, 1593, you said 1593? This was absurdly popular.
Yes.
And so Shakespeare being, again, it's not a satire, but presenting it as like, okay, these are two of the most idealized ideas you could possibly have. And we're just going to tell kind of a silly love story in the sense that it's like the woman falls in love immediately for no reason other than that he's attractive, right? But that connected with so many people that it was still his most popular work in his lifetime.
Yes.
And now the reason that it's not as popular, I would say, A, because of poetry not being, you know, the chosen form of most young people, but B, now we have more explicit versions of the same story in those K-dramas and in those 2008 Matthew McConaughey films.
Which are wonderful.
Which are
Ghost
lovely.
of Girlfriend's Past.
We love Fool's Gold here at A Minor Diner.
Yes, it's hanging up on the wall.
Yeah, the poster. The
Yes.
poster's in the corner.
Yeah. But it's I would agree with that, and I would say it's taking, ironically again, it's taking these superficial elements, because for example you say it's not as most popular even though it objectively is. Then what is, I would argue it's kind of hard to argue what second place would be. Everybody knows about Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
That is probably, you can say whatever you want, King Lear or Macbeth or whatever, but everyone to a 6-year-old level knows Romeo and Juliet. And what is that story about if you ask a person who's, you know, because it's about love and it's about
Undying
doomed
love.
Yeah, undying love, doomed loved, whatever, this and that and this and that. And it's like, yeah, sure, there's an aspect of it that is about that, but it's also a bit of a 1930s like screwball comedy of like it's like a familial war, if anything, between the Montagues and Capulets and all of this just general, like what what's the name? It's
West Side Story.
Yes, thank you very much. One of my favorites for some reason. The
that I
poster's
can't
right
think
there.
of the name of.
Yes, exactly. They shouldn't be remaking it, but whatever.
Are they remaking West Side Story?
It was supposed to come out in December. Spielberg is doing it.
Spielberg.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, whatever.
It sounds like again another parody. But if you look at Romeo and Juliet, like what's it about? Oh, it's just so tragic how they die at the end because they just love each other so much. These two, what are they, 14 years old? Or he's a little bit older.
Who don't really know each other. There's nothing much going on there in terms of. But this is the interesting thing, is it's like how much of what we think of as love is just this idea that has been forced upon us.
And that's what, because like when we get to our dessert, I would want to go through some like personal anecdotes of like, because I reached for this dessert and it's not real. Like it's the Midas touch is basically what my view of love is that love is, and this is like a fun thing to talk about because it's almost like telling someone what your dreams are. Like when you say, oh, what I think of love is, it's like kind of the most uninteresting thing in the world from individual to individual. But in my opinion, the idea, not just my love, but anyone's love for anybody, is like, okay, you meet Venus and Adonis, get married, right? Well, Adonis isn't going to look like that when he's 65. And it's very likely that Venus will have to give up things of her life and she will look worse too. So what is this like? You are very bored with one another and you are very, very complacent with life. What are those small sparks that still happen? And it's never, like I'll talk about when we get to our dessert, like it's never the most obvious, as with Blumenfeld. It's the eye, the twinkle in the eye, or the slight smirk of the lips that's not what's attractive. It's the meaning behind it. And it's very difficult to get into, like, for example, when we talk about a pastoral poem, which this is, and in case it wasn't clear in my incredibly eloquent recap of what this poem is about, they're running through the forest, and it's a big deal for both Adonis and her. She's coming from another plane of existence, and he's coming from civilization. And so this is going back to nature, going back to what's real. And there's a painter, American painter, Thomas Cole, and he would do very giant, like wide shots, like landscapes of this idealized, romanticized depiction of what America was.
Okay.
And he's one of those rare figures. We look back on the 1800s, and it's like, oh, wow, this is a bit manifest destiny, huh? And like, oh boy, this is not quite a great painting. But he has this like very spiritual, like the land is beautiful, and nature and all of the storms and things like that in my skies are beautiful because it's all unaddressed. And that's, I guess, what my argument would be, is that aesthetics is a construction. And so I guess for some context, I first became aware of Venus and Adonis because I was writing a script about a young woman who unrelentingly loved a young man who was very like self-destructive and things like that. And there inevitably comes the love at first sight scene that has to happen. And you can look at that in Snow White or the Matthew McConaughey movies. Anyone,
Gold,
take your pick. True Detective. There's always like a moment, and we recognize it because I've watched media since I'm 5. I know that look means, oh, he likes her or she likes him or whatever. And I kind of had to figure out how to do that as a writer and director. That's like, okay, well, I can play this score cue and that'll suggest that, but I can't actually really do that to a 10th degree because that's cliche and cheesy and bad. The look she gives him can't be overacting, can't be underacting. Like all of the actual aesthetics of art have to coalesce in a certain way that they almost become negated, in my opinion, to where like, okay, why did she, I've just met the boy, I've just met the girl, and now I see that the girl loves the boy. Who gives a crap? Like, what? I don't know who these people are. It's the same sort of thing, I feel, getting back to that larger point, that I don't feel that viewing love as an aesthetic, as we will get to in dessert with our featured dish, if you try to lean into it and look into the Ark of the Covenant, it becomes very hollow and it just collapses in on itself because love isn't love is like a context. And so you can't just say, how boring is Romeo and Juliet if it's like, well, this family doesn't like this family and that sucks for them or whatever. It's like, no, it makes sense because the boy and the girl, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the same thing. Well, what if the boy and the girl like each other, but mom and dad say no? That's also kind of boring because that's kind of every, like, you're 14 and I don't need you guys getting pregnant and whatever. Like, no, like just stay away, just be friends or whatever. Yeah. But that's sort of a problem that I would view, that so many, if you're not careful of it and you don't take caution in art, you can take the wrong things from media or create the wrong things in media, but then especially to the 10th degree with your personal life. If you choose to follow a Venus and Adonis path, this is what it means to be in a relationship in your teens. Not really, though, because that means you're not paying attention to your partner. That they're their own person. And your 20s and your 30s and your 40s. There's sort of the fashion statement every 5 years that 30 is the new 20. And then 40 is the new 20. And 50 is the new 20 and all of that. And it's a dangerous cycle to get into. And I would hope that Venus and Adonis would be this nutrient-stuffed 199 course entree that's just like a glutton. You should just pat your stomach and say, like, maybe I'll just do me for a bit, and I'll be not necessarily single or whatever, but I will listen to that other person, or I will just figure out exactly what I want and not drape the wrapping paper on that gift of love.
Absolutely, because you see this in the popularity of those aforementioned, say, K-dramas, right? Is that despite this being an artifice, it is an incredibly appealing artifice. And you see the dark side of it, even to tie back into Blumenfeld. So, for example, the model, the doe eye model, like most models, has a 10, 15-year career, fades into obscurity. Erwin Blumenfeld himself, after the end of the mid 60s, the man who was considered one of the best, most forward-thinking photographers of the day is now old hat, and basically retires, moves to Rome, where he thinks he has prostate cancer, and he essentially kills himself. Long story short,
wow. I
kills
didn't know
himself.
that part.
It's kind of interesting. He deliberately gave himself a heart attack running up and down the Spanish Steps in Rome. So it's not like he wrote a suicide note, but he ran up and down them so many times that he gave himself a heart attack at age 73, because now it's like, well, I got nothing, while with his 20-something aged mistress.
And see, that's what I mean, because that's an insanely, I mean, obviously he's in Rome. It is a very romantic death. Like there's something very Shakespearean, something very poetic about that. But that's sort of the same thing. What I mean with aesthetics is like completely tangential example. I look at Nirvana as like, okay, what if John Lennon liked to write songs with a ton of distortion, basically, and I'm just going to write those kinds of songs, and some are a little ugly, some are very beautiful, whatever kind of thing. Nirvana, because of the 90s and because of, we can blame 1,000 different sources, but I think the people are more of a problem than capitalism or commercialism or the music industry or whatever. It's like, no, he's the tortured genius. And that's why I listen to Nirvana. Or no, it's the heroin or this or that, or it's 10,000 things about it. Because like I had no idea he died on the Spanish Steps giving himself a heart attack like that. But that's you have this thing, like you can see it with younger generations, younger diners to the A minor diner here, where you get like XXX Tentacion or Lil Peep or figures like that, or even like Mac Miller. And Mac Miller is a bit sacrosanct for a lot of people in that way. But it's like, okay, but that kiss of death thing is what percentage of your enjoyment or your understanding or your the lens in which you choose to critically analyze something, if that is influenced by the artist in a superficial way, I think that's insanely dangerous. Like
it's an artifice, but and you see it like it kind of coalesces into itself in a sense that it's like, yes, the audience buys into the tortured artist mystique, but so does Kurt Cobain.
Yes,
and you see Blumenfeld believe himself now to be a genius and to be this forward thinker, but then when this is like, when something happens that proves the opposite to him, he cannot handle it.
Yes. And I think that's sort of what I mean. There's this weird, aesthetics has a new role in our lives in a very insanely, my opinion, dangerous way that back, like here's the most superficial example. And I guess let's call it a Venus and Adonis thing. And let's throw Narcissus in there somewhere. Narcissus is essentially a Greek figure that loves his own reflection so much that he drowns in the water that he's looking at. I think there's this John F. Kennedy quote, like helping everybody is like, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? I think it is like unconscionable to me. It is absolutely insane that anyone would ever take their phone with their camera and like take a picture of themselves and post it. And like, here's the food I'm eating and here's the this and that I'm doing, because I was born in 1991. And so if you did that in 1996, if you saw adults or people doing that, it's like a degree of like masturbatory behavior that's like unfathomable then. And
in
then,
96.
In 96. And
to an extent though, because we're still taking like 96, they've still got their cameras. They're still taking photos of themselves, just not in the selfie degree.
Yes, because like you'll go to someone's Instagram profile and they can do whatever they want. I don't mind. And like models, it makes sense. That's, they're selling their career in that way. But like today, like a selfie stick or a selfie, that's like a nomenclature. That's just an accepted word and an accepted behavior. I remember when we were in culinary high school together,
Yeah.
like selfie.
Learning the fundamentals of the kitchen.
Yes. When that's about when selfie kind of started, because you're not really doing them with flip phones. You kind of are. But by the time iPhone comes out and you can post things to the internet super quickly with a decent camera, that's kind of like the millennial cardinal sin that Gen Xers and baby boomers are like, oh, they're just taking pictures of themselves all the time, and it's the worst thing ever. Like, you hit 2012 or 13, that's like gone. It's just an understood part of human nature that, well, we take pictures of ourselves because we're very flattered with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it is insane because, like, I will watch, because you can get recommended pages on Instagram or videos on YouTube or things like that. And you'll have couples who are perfect and they're interpreted as perfect. And not even in the cliche way of like, you don't know everyone's story. I'm sure there's bad things behind the curtain. But when they break up and things don't go so well and you learn about them later for whatever reason, you learn like, okay, from the start, aesthetics was 40% of their entire relationship. Yeah. They brought an audience into their relationship. And I think even the most private, any girl that I've ever dated was not very keen on selfies and was not very keen on us displaying each other on social media. Even then, it still happens a bit. Like, it still happens enough to the point where I'm performing because, look, here's my partner, here's my life that I have.
Yeah.
I'm sure when we get to like a travel episode, it's about the same thing of like, I went to China, here's the Great Wall, and here's the Great Wall, and here's the dumplings, and here's this and that. And it's like...
And we're all part of that. We're all part of this artifice.
We're all... The ship is rising, and no matter how much I want to be a submarine, there's still a sea floor there.
So the question is, if as the tortured artist folds in on themselves and the artifice of love starts to fold in on itself, will the artifice of selfie obsession, not just selfie obsession, but almost like the perfect life photographed, will that fold in on itself?
I would say it's a tricky thing because then you get, I think, ugliness for the sake of ugliness, and that's the new rebellion. Death grips, hardcore, love them, but it's the same sort of let's strip the aesthetic out completely.
Yep.
And I think that's why that resonated for me and so many other people is there's just no anything. They just drop an album and they got weird, stupid, bad camera footage, bad cinematography, whatever. But that's how you know that it's real, is that there's not the attention to aesthetic there.
Which is not true of our dessert, for better or for worse. Hopefully you saved a little bit of room after that massive 44,000 stanza entree.
It's $199, which leaves room for one more.
Oh, yes. Okay, so we got one stanza left, and luckily it is time for our dessert. This is a relatively short album. It's average
sweet.
length.
Yeah,
it's sweet. It's sweet. It's
fluffy.
It's like a nice chocolate mousse. It's not going to fill you up too full, but it's nice. It's rye. It's home. Their third album and second in a few years. It was interesting because their first one, Woman, came out all the way back in 2013.
Yeah, early part of the decade.
Yep.
I was in college when that album came out.
Same.
And it was, I'm not sure your experience, but it was always like, in any circle, it's kind of like the sexiest album of like the early 2010s.
So it's the most cliche thing to do to compare Rye to Sade, but is Sade.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And I love me some Sade, and I loved that first Rye album. I remember I was working in college radio when it came out, and the music director at the time was playing it when I came into the office that day. And he's like, listen to this album. And at that point, so when they premiered, they were anonymous. So the band started as a duo of this Canadian man, Miloš, and a Danish guy. And but that was unknown. And if you listen to his vocals, they could go either way. Like it could be a woman singing, it could be a man singing. It's really kind of androgynously sexy.
Yeah, yeah. And in that sort of, that's interesting because I get forgotten about that aspect, but it's exactly like The Weeknd in that way, where The Weeknd would have these very provocative album covers and no one quite knew who he was. He's Canadian something or other, not even necessarily his name. And then again, once he sort of put a more public face on things, I would argue the aesthetic of attraction was kind of lost.
Yep.
Because now it's The Weeknd, and it's not that feeling that that trilogy, that mixtape trilogy had. And so for those that don't know, Woman, their debut album, the album cover is like a black and white, essentially a close-up on a woman's shoulder blade / neck with her head arched back. Somewhat like, I guess, Radiohead's The Bends, if you were to zoom it down towards the neck, it were to be just infinitely more attractive than a crash test dummy like that. But
yeah.
That was sort of, I had a similar sort of experience where it was, I didn't really know, the vocals are up in that high range, but not Ariana Grande, like whistly, and not The Weeknd sort of Michael Jackson-y, and so it could very easily go both ways. And even the lyrical content of that album was very non-definitive. Without being vague, it wasn't sure who's the narrator in this exchange, the man or the woman.
Exactly. Like it's not necessarily. I hesitate to say it didn't have a strong voice, because I think it did in a sense. But that voice was also anonymous. That voice was non-defined. And so they lose that mystique. They take a 5-year break before Blood comes out in 2018. Similar aesthetic. We've got instead of a neck, we've got kind of a 2/3 shot. It ends at the butt. Naked woman from the back. Black and white, same deal in terms of the music as well. Maybe a step down,
which I would compare to Blumenfeld in that way, strictly visual aesthetic wise, is like, well, what's more sexy and eye grabbing than a shoulder? Just a butt. And it's like, well, okay, sure. I mean, an arched back would have been nice or something like that.
Well, there's the arched back as well. So if we're looking,
that's right. I meant like,
so
not a wide.
Yeah, it's a long shot instead of the close up.
Yeah.
And what I found immediately interesting, this new one, Home, we've still got the same like singular noun that doesn't say anything, but it's in color. We got a face.
Yes, it is the 2020s, and it is a new era for rye.
Yep.
I guess there's color in the grain now. There's seeds in the grain of this rye bread here. That's like an interesting choice too, because I guess I would ask you in an impolite way. I would ask you how you feel about it by first stating how I feel about it. Double exposure like that, where you take the negative aspects of a photo, negative is in the darker colors of a photo, and superimpose brighter things. So in the case of Home, it's a young woman kind of staring up. I'm not sure how I would describe her expression, but face is mostly covered by hair, and then behind her is a bunch of dark trees. And that superimposed on that is like a California valley sunset. And for better or worse, music always has the judging a book by its cover aspect, where Beethoven's Ninth doesn't have that because it's just sheet music and it's fine. But since we started compiling things into albums, people take great care crafting an aesthetic that they want to reflect what they're doing. Would you regard this as accurate to the sound?
So the album starts. The intro is... So the entire group has really been led by Miloš's voice since the beginning. Like, it's easily, that is what is the cream of the rye crop.
The whipped cream on
per se, right?
the cream cheese on the rye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the intro is actually the Danish National Girls Choir singing with Miloš for the first time. He's sharing that vocal section with some other people. And then the second song comes in, Come In Closer, and we are almost immediately, like, song starts, it sounds like the first two albums. But then they start coming in with that drum beat. All right. And it's like, okay, this is color right off the bat. And I don't think the entire album feels that way, but I would say, the most explicitly what you could call colorful songs by Rye throughout, like, sprinkled throughout the album.
I would agree. I would say two things before I forget. Any album with like an intro and an outro gets like an instant, at least one thumbs up from me, where it's like, this is an album I did care beyond just stringing things together. And so like interludes and things like that, I don't necessarily always listen to those, but those are always essentially an aesthetic choice to like this collection of songs is meant to be taken seriously as a whole. And so I really did appreciate that, and I like choral music, so that was great. And I would agree, I was a bit taken aback by hearing, like, you would never describe Rye as being funky until like this. And it's like, I don't know if I enjoy these bass lines in a active way, like as a 1970s disco or Joy Division where the basses are cool, but there's way more bass and way more drums.
There's like the instrumentation is not necessarily more in depth, like deeper. Like it's essentially the same as the first two albums in that sense, but it's more direct than the first two albums in that sense. So we've got some new disco influence here, which there never really was. It was very R&B for the first couple.
That instrumentation, at least on the first couple, is way more like stringed instruments, like not quite orchestral or anything like that, but there is a air of, I guess, similar to their album covers, where you would not call their album covers erotic or pornographic or whatever, because it's displaying the female form in that sort of way. This is, I think, it's a good, like, truthfully, first impression wise, I would probably retroactively hate the music or not feel any respect toward it if there was another like explicitly provocative album cover, because it's like, well, you're just shooting fish in a barrel. It's like like sultry, sexy music with those kind of slow tempos to an image of something that Blumenfeld wouldn't have done. Whereas this is between this and there is like a general, in looking at the lyrics, there's like a general point that I feel is trying to be made. I'm not going to pretend to be so pretentious to say exactly what it is, but also at the same time, I'm not 1,000% sure what it is, because there's a general arc to the whole thing. And like, if we go back to Venus and Adonis, there's the motifs of like the rosy cheeks and the purple on white, and there's painted pictures that are continually painted to kind of serve a new context each time. This one, talks about like Black Rain specifically, and there's a song called Black Rain, but there's like 2 or 3, maybe even 4, I'd have to check, other songs with lyrics that are Black Rain. And I was trying to figure out, Black Rain to me means like the wastewater at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Like black water is like or Black Rain is like a weird concept that I'm trying to figure out what that means in the context of, because this is, lyrically speaking, lyrics are not supposed to be poetry and vice versa. They're a different metric. They have to sound audibly good. But he's got a very, I want your take on his perspective, because I don't think he has much of a perspective. I think he's kind of, it's like a mood board that he's throwing up of like.
So this is what, so I was going to tie it in. So we talked about Blumenfeld with sex and death, women and death. And there's a darker side to a lot of Blumenfeld's work. And then Venus and Adonis, like both, like Venus comes on with love in an almost threatening fashion, I would say.
Yeah, sick-minded is what it says.
Yeah, sick-minded right off the bat, right? There's nothing like that here. We're going for palate. Like this entire, and it sounds like we're trashing this album. I like it.
Yeah, it's good.
I do quite like the album. Yeah. It is palatable almost to a fault.
That is, because yes, like the album, it's insanely superficial, but it is your first information about any piece of music is that album cover. There are no less than like 14 billion people in Los Angeles who are posting that album cover every day, every hour of like double exposed, because it's me at the beach and then me up in the hills with the whatever. And I was very worried because I had heard 1 or 2 singles before hearing this. Didn't listen to them all the way through because I didn't want to spoil it. But there's like an aesthetic in Grand Theft Auto 5 because it's supposed to take place in this fictionalized Los Angeles. And so they kind of take what does 2006 to 2015 sound like, while still sounding great. It sort of fits that of like, I just think LA and California are so great. And also, coincidentally, I've never left this place ever. It's just kind of a magic place where winter doesn't really happen. And that's sort of, again, I do genuinely like it as an album. I heard it and was insanely pleasantly surprised at the actual like depth that it does have. Yeah. But then like looking at lyrics, I'm trying to remember some from Woman, their first album. Woman is like torpedoing a battleship in terms of if you have a significant other and you want to have an intimate moment. I typically use the bike chase theme from E.T., but also Woman works. But
I like the
no, exactly. It's like Christmas, but they got to get away from the FBI, which is my life philosophy. But Woman is it takes some like at least an artistic point that is kind of super tricky with sexuality, because I don't want to go so far as saying a dominant and a submissive element to any relationship, but no matter what, there's a dance. Yeah. And in Woman, I'm like, okay, regardless of this androgynous voice, they are either the woman or the man in this, and I can see how they feel about a partner or whatever. Whereas this, it's like, just as an example, to contrast some of the lyrics. Do you have some lyrics?
I was going to, So first, one of my favorite songs off that first album is called 3 Days.
Yep.
Oh, I'm famished, so I'll eat your minerals like a rabid beast at a foolish feast. I'll steal your breath like a twisted thief with a mangled glove. Like that, those are A, good lyrics.
Yes.
B, it's got that like dom sub thing that you're talking about that could go either way, but there's like a predatory feeling there. And then if you compare it, this is from Beautiful, which is also, I think, one of the better songs on this album. But you compare that, oh, I feel so good inside. Oh, I feel so free with you by my side. Beautiful woman. Oh, babe, spend some time with me.
Yes. Like I have like quite a few instances of those lyrics because I get a bit overly sensitive because growing up in the early 2000s, and it's like, you know who the worst band of all time definitely is? Coldplay. And I'm like, Coldplay is completely fine. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And like Viva La Vida is great and this and that. And then you get this aesthetic. And that's sort of what I mean. Coldplay is very guilty of like, we're just going to be something on the surface and that's our new album or whatever. But this is like, because you're there with your significant other on the blanket watching a sunset. And it's like, really, is that it? Is that the whole picture that you're going to paint for me here? Because like Safe Word is another track on this album. Safe Word is an explicitly like, okay, we all know what's being implied there.
Yeah.
This is, the more I know your face, oh, hey, the more I push this way. Do you know your safe word? Oh, I love your face. The more I love your face, oh, hey, the more I get to taste. The more I love this feeling. It's a safe word. Take some time to be lost. Give my heart something soft. Take some time with ourselves. Don't be harsh with that cold knife. Feel around these dark rooms. Oh, I love it, your black waters. Feel around you're weightless. Feel around we're fateless. And I'm like, this is everything I just described, antithetical to Shakespeare. I'm like, this is just a random boy or girl or genderless anything. That's sort of what I mean. If it was a gay relationship, a heterosexual relationship, and any relationship between anything, even inanimate objects or whatever, I think there'd be more texture to the whole album.
But this is what I'm talking about with the palette, right? So I, in a somewhat positive way, could recommend this to anyone.
Yes.
Really. But what it reminds me of, in a sense, is so you go to a mall and you step into, say, the H&M, or you go into the Urban Outfitters, and there's music playing, and it's nice, but then you leave.
Yes, and I think, in the least inflammatory words possible, I think that's a plague that I think that's, because I would say Rye's third album, Home, is like the best album I've heard of recent releases. Probably 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. And, not on a entirely subjective scale, like there's some like weird esoteric, pitch altered weird Japanese meets whatever breakdance sort of music that I like. But this is, like you're saying, the widest possible net to give the most amount of people the most net positive experience. And at the same time, it's elevator music, like you say, in that way. And it reduces romanticism, and because that's it's not a problem, again, because it's we are saying these lyrics without any inflection in our voice, not singing them. There's no instrumentation.
Because the dude, again, has a gorgeous voice.
Wonderful.
I was reading, I was listening to a series of lectures about linguistics, and the guy was talking about breathy voice versus creaky voice. So creaky voice is what we generally think of like as a vocal fry, where you're constricting the glottis as much as you can. Like, oh my God, I'm kind of talking like this. Like, you're restricting it.
Yeah.
Whereas a breathy voice is like opening up the throat as much as you can and like letting air go as you're talking. This man has the breathiest voice of all existence, as far as I'm concerned. Because like you can hear just the oxygen going in and out of his voice as he is singing, and I think it's pleasant in like an almost ASMR way.
I was just about to say that, because I go both ways on ASMR, where I think it's, again, a weirdly Blade Runner-esque way of like the search for intimacy.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to listen to someone whisper sweet nothings into my ear.
Because I have nothing left.
Yes, and it's not a good or bad thing or a sad or healthy thing to do, but it is like a weird lizard brain. We are human beings, and those sweet nothings that are whispered to you by someone who's actually whispering to you, that's just asking, what do you want for breakfast? Or like, I need a ride home or whatever. I don't know why I go to those, but like,
we need to do our laundry.
Yes, exactly. You specifically, Jesse. It's a weird reduction because I feel that aesthetics is like a huge term, multi-syllable word that is an entire branch of philosophy and everything like that. But when you get these like lofty, heavy concepts, like the word awesome is like a biblical word that means like a mountain just like ate itself. And I'm just like in awe of like, that's incredible. But then you will get, like you said, someone from the 80s just
Talking about scrambled eggs.
monotone. Yeah. Like, oh, that's awesome. And it's like a direct, like contradiction of terms, contradiction of meanings. You have aesthetics, and at least like, I'm sure in both of our circles, whatever film communities or artistic, like illustrative painting or music or any kind of thing, whenever anyone seems to describe aesthetics, it's this like undivorceable marriage to mood. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, that's a big mood is exactly the same as saying aesthetics. Like, I can't use that word in day-to-day conversation that I might want to use it in a lofty way.
Yeah.
Of like you're saying linguistics.
Yeah.
Linguistics is probably 15 years away from becoming the same word.
Totally.
Of, no, you can't criticize the way I pronounce that. It's like a linguistic choice or whatever. That's a very, I think it's great when it comes to, who was it that you referenced earlier? This is like a 2010s version.
Akon, a
Yes.
sexy bitch.
Oh, well, not. Yes, but this is like the Akon of the 2020s is Rye. Yes, I'm partial to Sweet Escape.
I don't remember what reference
Like-
you're referencing.
Like let's say the 70s, like Earth, Wind, and Fire sort of thing, like September, right? Everyone just kind of likes that song, even like
Because it's just a genuinely really good song.
right, and it's like there's something that's about, and there's like a lot of deliberate construction to that, and I feel that I enjoy postmodern music, like experimental Brian Eno on Down the Iceberg, like that general side of things. I feel that there's a weird trend in music like this where if I wanted to, regardless of who my significant other is, they haven't come home yet, and I want to set a great stage for them when they get here to the minor diner and we can have a wonderful meal together. It used to be like cliche and old hat to do like, oh, like Al Green and Marvin Gaye and like just standard R&B hits or whatever used to be like little effort. And it feels like there's this weird, I follow this guy on Twitter. He's a journalist for, I don't want to say the New York Post, somewhere, or the New Amsterdam Journal or somewhere in New York or whatever. And he was trying to make this argument that like, I think we need more explicitly genre defined music, because I think everyone's pulling from way too many sources and the waters get so muddy in this way. Because like, for example, if I put on Woman for a young woman that happens to be, in my company or whatever, she can subconsciously, inherently like tell like probably what my intentions are or what my wishes are, things like that. Home is like, are we about to get married or become boyfriend and girlfriend or get divorced, or is he going to break up with me? Like it's about like, I want to make an album about relationships. Okay, what about relationships? Just words that have to do with relationships, not anything so tangible.
So yeah, that's an interesting point that you make, and you see it in the one word titles, right? So we've got Woman, we've got Blood, and now we've got Home, and apparently this is a reference. Can you guess? To Milosh's home in California.
Okay, I was going to say it's either a dumb reference to Canada or a bad reference.
No, it's like a reference to his house.
His house.
Yeah.
Okay, because see, I would want home. If I'm a sultry, brooding Southern California artist who's trying to make music for people to make babies to or whatever, home is not home. Like Shakespeare is rolling in his metaphorical grave. Not that this has to be, it's song lyrics. They can be whatever they need to be. But like home is wherever I am I'm with you. Oh, that's an artistic statement. Or home is this part of your body that I enjoy so much, or something like that.
But so doubling the home is with his significant other, and yeah, home what's that stupid? What's that indie folk? Home is wherever.
I think
I'm
what
with you.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like so
Oops.
that
Yeah, that's
where
right.
so it's comfort as well as a literal house,
Yeah, and
but that's saying it like it's deeper than it really is. But like that is the definition of home instead of house to
yes.
begin with.
Yes, and like one aspect that we haven't touched on is I believe I don't know the exact one-to-one ratio on this, but that's definitely his romantic partner in the album cover.
I
I'm
would
pretty
assume
sure
so, but I have no.
because I think it is. I know it definitely is for the second one, the butt one.
The butt.
Yeah, and then
What if the album name was just butt instead of blood?
and it wins. Yeah, best record. And it might be that same woman on the first one or whatever.
Possibly.
But that is like a tricky thing that I think most people, you can look at it in basically any form of art, is what you should do when you're making anything, a song, a movie, a poem, a sculpture, whatever, is you should always have like one person in mind that you are deliberately making it for.
Interesting.
However, you can't negate the fact that an audience is going to listen to that, and it's also for them. And so, for example, I'm sure his, whatever she is, girlfriend or wife or whatever, I'm sure she's like blown away because there's 13,000 in jokes and inside references to what Black Rain is and all of that kind of stuff. But for us, it's like, I don't feel like in Woman, he can say whatever exact experiences he's going through and then stop short of like definite concrete details. I've never been to Canada. I had a layover there once, and it was in the American terminal, which counts as American territory. So I've never been to Canada, and he never says that of like, we're in the snow of Toronto or whatever, first kiss, whatever. So when he says anything about a kiss, I can easily just project my experiences into that experience, have a good time to that album. This one, I like it because it's funky and it's fun and it's got choral elements, which I'm always a fan of. But then it's a worrying trend in my mind that songs are, as maybe we've talked about before, hyper specific. This is my artist name, and my artist name is my name. And when I write the songs, it's going to be about an exact literal thing that's impenetrable for you to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Great if you're Bob Dylan and he has those specific songs, even then, not that many. And then I worry that there's the Spotification effect of like, well, what I do is I just throw on someone else, or an algorithm is curating this for me. And so when I'm looking to have a good time with my significant other, I'm going to get, not to rye bread instead of like chocolate cake. And it's halfway concerning because I would wonder, like, this guy's going to have an amazing, not to be presumptuous, he's going to have an amazing breakup album, and it's going to be like about distinct things and whatever, because this isn't necessarily about anything.
Yeah.
Like, if I was writing about a relationship, of course the beginning is great and fun and electric and everything, and then you settle into these different eras. This is like, to me, Rye is what, in his 30s, however old he probably is. This feels like a 50s singer-songwriter or something who's like done his normal stuff, and then now he's got these fans that'll defend anything he does. Not saying that's the case with Rye, but what I mean is like, well, this is what it's like to be in love in your 50s. I'm like, yeah, there's good poetic takes on that for sure, but you're also like living day to day with a best friend roommate that you also love at that point. And
interesting.
And so it's a hard thing for me to red is the color of love, and hearts and this and that are aesthetic choices. This one is like fun because I sit there in the spin cycle of like, what is it about? Let me figure out what this is about. And then it's like the most tangible thing is Black Rain. I'm like,
yeah. So this is why it's our dessert. It's not going to fill you up with content. it is going to be very pleasant. There's a handful of songs, Black Rain being one of them. My other favorites, Come In Closer, the aforementioned Beautiful, and Helpless, are all very well crafted, sexy, vaguely R&B, vaguely disco-y vibe music. Everything else can kind of float in around it. And you kind of get lost in a vibe, but the vibe is generally pleasant, and it's a solid piece of dessert.
Yes. And I would just say, as a nice, you've pushed your plate away from you and you're reflecting on how did we get the aesthetics of attraction, the aesthetics of love. I would hope that you didn't even take a look at the dishes that we were giving to you. And it's not even necessarily about the consistency of the texture or whatever, because I would argue, and I would ask you the same thing as it pertains to all of this now, any profound or meaningful romantic relationship, or even friend or anything relationship I've had in my life, could be depicted aesthetically in a song or a movie or something like that. But any of the actual presence of love or attraction was not like the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing. Mm-hmm. So like, just as an example, I had a girlfriend once and she would snore, and she was not very happy about the fact that she would snore. But I found that to be a good sound, and I slept better because of it, because I knew that she was sleeping soundly, right? And then same girl, like taste. She had cooked something and it wasn't good. And not only was it not good, it wasn't cooked enough. And I ate a part of it that I shouldn't have eaten. It was a squid. And they have the ink sacs in there, and you're not supposed to eat the ink sac or whatever. But I held my tongue for like 30 seconds or as long as I could until my mouth is full of whatever. Very ugly sight. But she recognized that as, oh, you're going to actually eat whatever I put in front of you because you're supportive. There was what my main point I would like to make with aesthetics as it pertains to like Rye. Rye has very specific, these chords. These are the chords of love. Mm-hmm. These are the notes of love. These are the this and that of love. But oftentimes I feel in art, it's about what you're not saying. So there's plenty of, Shakespeare could paint a much more vivid picture or literal picture, but he chooses when to not say things. Mm-hmm. And so like an example would be, I went out with this one young woman and she wanted to go on a hike, and she wanted to see wildflowers. And I was like, okay, so what's your favorite flower? And she said, red lilies. And I was like, there are no red lilies anywhere near A Minor Diner whatsoever in a 50-mile radius. There's no such thing as a red lily. I don't say that to her. I say, it sounds great, sounds whatever. This was during the lockdown and everything. And so supply chains were gone. There is nowhere in a 100-mile radius that has red lilies. So I had to go find red lilies from a person who was not willing to sell them to me, and have to work out like a exchange of like, I will do this for you if you will give me your 3 red lilies. That second date with that young woman didn't go that well, and it was kind of expressed of like, oh, was it troublesome to get the red lilies? Yes, it was. And I said it was difficult because of pandemic, whatever, and then stopped. And it was like, I knew in that moment, okay, I genuinely do like her, even if she doesn't like me back. I do like her because I chose to restrict, and it was about what I didn't say and about what I didn't do. That love or affection or attraction or whatever you want to call that was about the binding of, it's not the eye in Blumenfeld's, in his photo, it's not the eye and the lips, it's their proximity to each other. And in Shakespeare, yeah, it's 199 stanzas, but that's because it's that short, and you have to put distance between the purple sun rising and then the purple blood on his face, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then same thing with Rye. I do feel that it is a successful in terms of the aesthetics of attraction, because you got that nice intro, outro that's almost like a church service, that like, whatever love is, it is divine and untouchable. Yeah. I wish he would touch it, and I'm sure maybe that's an explicit way to put it. I wish he would touch that love a bit more, but in general, yeah, I would hope that our dishes. They were nicely separated, but it was their proximity to each other that gave you that spicy flavor on your tongue at the moment.
That spicy meatball. And if you didn't like that, also on the menu this month, Shame Drunk Tank Pink. Very British, surprisingly thought out post-punk to blast after your 6th beer.
Robo Hands put out a new album called Shapes. Andy Baxter is a wonderfully talented jazz fusion musician, and his latest album is outrageously smooth without sacrificing any of the punch.
Portrayal of Guilt, We Are Always Alone. This is the sound of getting sad and beating your head repeatedly against a brick.
The Dirty Nil put out an album called F Art. It's actually more explicit than that, but I'm a good boy.
Fart.
Yes, I'm a good boy, and so I don't even say fart. But it's a post-punk. It's almost always awful. However, this album is so lively and dynamic that it might almost make you believe in guitars again.
Viagra Boys, Welfare Jazz. They're Swedish, there's horns sometimes, and they rock.
And then we have Degloved Hand with their album She's Vaporous. Vaporwave is easy to do, but very difficult to do right. And thankfully for us, our bass chef has put out a wonderfully evocative collection of melodies that wiggle into your ear and touch your heart. That's right, our bass chef put out an album.
Aw, shucks. Treble chef.
We have to honor you.
You didn't have to talk about that.
But it made me feel good in an aesthetically pleasing way.
Oh.
But in the actual way of not looking at it, there was something genuinely, if you listen to Aphex Twin's Selected Ambient Works Volume 2 from 1992, I think, or 4 or whatever, there's stuff like that reminds me of it, where it's very beautiful songs that can contain multiple melodies. And so it's very evocative without becoming a hashtag mood or a just a selfie of weren't the 80s great, weren't the 90s great. It actually has something to say, which is great for a instrumental, mostly instrumental. And the ending song is joyful. It's just better than Christmas.
Well, I'm glad you liked it, and I hope you very much enjoyed our first meal of the month.
Well, actually, let's have him come back to the kitchen for a sec.
Oh, yeah. That'll be fun.
Yeah, come on back. This is Notes to the Chef. So we reached out, asked you guys, our noble patrons, what was the first influential work of art in your life? What was a very formative thing that you experienced in the form of a work of art that influenced your life? Jacob from Newark, New Jersey said, "You might laugh, but my first awakening in art was actually Minecraft and its soundtrack. I'm a little younger than you guys. I don't know how old you think we are. But for me and many in my generation, it introduced us to slower pacing. I remember coming home from school and playing for a few hours before dinner. It didn't matter what kind of day I had, it was always very calming and relaxing to walk around in that world and listen to the minimalist music. I started playing piano because of it, and I will always own Minecraft as my first big artistic inspiration."
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
We've got Zara from Jaipur, India. She says, "I was only 7 years old when my parents took me to see Star Wars, the original one, and to this day nothing has topped the experience for me. The spectacle, the fantastic music, and the revolutionary visuals all combined to create the most memorable artistic work of my young life. I walked out of the theater as a different girl, waving a branch I found on the ground like it was a lightsaber. This is what I credit as making me want to be an artist, and I never would have become one without that trip to a galaxy far, far away."
That's good. That's an older one. That's cool. Abby from Boston, Massachusetts says, "These are the times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not the still calm of life or the repose of a Pacific station that great characters are formed. The habits of a vigorous mind are formed in contending with difficulties. Great necessities call out great virtues. When a mind is raised and animated by scenes that engage the heart, then those qualities which would otherwise lay dormant wake into life and form the character of the hero and the statesman. P.S. Go Patriots." Actually, if you think about it, I think that's Abby from Boston is like Abigail Adams. So like, I'm not quite sure how she got the Gmail or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's like a lake house situation. If you
Oh,
think
we got a
about it.
lake house situation here.
So Abigail Adams, thank you for coming to the diner.
Well, that's sweet. We're time traveling multiple times today. And our last one, Hyun Seung from Busan, South Korea, said, the first work of art I saw as a child that inspired me was actually an American film. In 2006, the stars of the film Speed reunited for a film about a man and a woman who live 2 years apart but can communicate through a mailbox that sends their letters through time. It's called The Lake House. It's not a good movie, but its win at the Teen Choice Awards for Best Kiss did inspire me to never visit America. P.S. Go Patriots.
Huh. Well, I guess while we're on the subject, since you asked, I would say the first influential work in my life, for whatever it's worth, is probably Fantasia, the Disney film, 1941. It just sort of awakened music and film and narrative storytelling and all of that in me. And I think it holds up to this day.
Mine would be my dad's cassette tape of Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction that
Cool.
I listened to while I swinged. Is swinged the past tense verb of to swing or swung?
Or swang.
Swang. I swang all day long to the sweet sounds of sex via Guns N' Roses. So, well, anyways, we love.
I'm doing Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. Yeah, it's good. It's good.
We love hearing from our patrons, and we like to bring some kind of thought-provoking question for the chefs back here in the kitchen every meal. So after this meal, we want to know, what do you think is the most influential work of art of the 2010s? So you can answer this in a few different ways. You can write to us at aminordiner@gmail.com. You can leave us a message on Instagram, Facebook, or just comment on our YouTube. And that's about all we have today. Thanks for dining with us tonight. Be sure to thank your hostess, Ms. Mandy Groves, on your way out. And wave to Edward Tart on keys, who's playing us out the door. A Minor Diner, is recorded on location and produced by Epicene Motion Picture Company. Goodbye, folks.
We love you. We love you. And clean behind those ears.